Hi, Alicia Moulton from the Honey Company. It is April and we are so excited to start a new beekeeping season. Our package pickup is on April 9th and we think many of you are probably wondering, where do I put my hives? How do I set up an apiary? Some of you are doing this for the first time and some of you maybe have done this before and maybe want some more tips about finding the best spot for your bees. The first thing I want to say is that bees, just like it's their nature to just want to get to work. And some of these factors, like they'll get to work in spite of them. But as beekeepers, we try to just sort of give them the best possible chance for success and just to situate them so that they're just happier. But they'll get to work even if all these circumstances are not ideal, if that makes sense. Okay, so the first thing is that a lot of areas require a beekeeping license. We're not regulatory or anything at our company, but if your local area might require a beekeeping license. Usually that's on the state level. In Utah, they require a license, and there's a graduated fee depending on how many hives you keep. So it's a good idea to get a beekeeping license. It helps with disease control and stuff like that. The ag bee guy, Joey Caputo, he's in our area and he's really great to work with if we have a disease outbreak or need a certificate to cross state lines with bees or anything like that. He's really great to work with. So grab that license so that you have a connection there and some help if you need it. The next thing is that you're probably wondering where to put your hives. So some things to consider is that you need to find a place to put your hives that is within 2 miles of nectar and pollen for the entire growing season. So this may or may not be in your backyard. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you'll need to find an apiary or like a field or something like that that's situated in a place with abundant nectar. Okay, another thing is that you're going to want to put your hive on some kind of hive stand. So we use 4x4 shipping pallets. Some people use cinder blocks or a purchased hive stand. And then, here goes the clock. We're going to put our pallets or hive stands about 10 to 15 feet apart. And then you can put, for us, what we do is we put 4 colonies on there, each one facing a different compass direction. Let's see, the orientation of the entrance can matter. We do it all the different directions and bees thrive during all 4 of them. But something to consider is that when the sun hits the beehive in the morning and warms it up after a cool desert night, then the bees are warmer and their little cold-blooded bodies are warm enough to get going and get working, and the sun comes out. And so if the earlier that the sun hits their porch in a hive, the earlier they'll get to work, the more time that they'll spend foraging and can have the potential to collect more nectar, produce more honey, and be more successful going into the next winter and producing honey for you. So let's see. Bee boxes need to be level. So this is just like eyeball level, like you don't want to put them on a slant like that, but just mostly level, because as bees build honeycomb, they festoon. So they hang by gravity and they draw the line based on how they hang with gravity, right? So that is especially important in foundationless frames, but can also affect drawn comb, foundation too. But you want the frames to be parallel so that they're hanging straight down. You want the frames to hang straight down so that the bees can build comb really naturally on them. And if not, if your hive was like tilted, they would still build straight down, and then you'd get a bunch of rogue comb, which can be really messy to try to manage. So another factor is that you'd want to be careful about the wind and make it so that the prevailing wind doesn't just like blow straight into the entrance of their hives. That can chill them and be just annoying for them and can make them a little bit mad. So face it at a 90-degree angle to the prevailing wind. Another thing is that you want an area with good air drainage, like if you have a cold pocket in your yard. Bees like heat, they like to be in full sun, and they like to be hot. If you think of areas of the world where insects thrive the best, it's usually in hot, moist places, right? So put them in the sun where they can incubate their brood at the correct temperatures and be happier that way. Let's see. You want to put your hives so that the bees are not flying out into high traffic areas. For example, if you put the hive so that the entrance, the bees have to fly out, and then you put your kids' swing set right here, then the kids and the bees are constantly going to be interacting with each other, and you're more likely to have kids getting stung. So instead of that, if you turn the hive around backwards so that the bees are flying out away from the swing set, then they won't interact as much, if that makes sense, and less interaction means less stings. Let's see. We've had a lot of success with in our Provo home when we had like a fence line, and the city code's there that you have to be 10 feet from the fence line. So we put our hives 10 feet back with the entrances facing toward the fence, which made it so that the bees had to fly up and over the fence to get out of their hive. And that helped a lot to avoid the traffic areas, and because it made the bees fly higher than, head level really quickly. They had to gain an elevation really fast as they took off in height. And again, that prevents people from getting stung when they're not expecting it. By the way, foraging bees are not aggressive, but the stings happen if, it lands on a kid's face and then they hurry and try to, they're nervous and they smash it and then they get stung in the face or something. That happened to my kids. Like, they got stung here one time and I was like, oh, they were really little babies. Anyway, but you want to prevent the interaction as much as possible, even though the bees are not trying to be aggressive. If they're like swatted or brushed, or they could sting. Okay. Enough about that. Okay, so like we said before, colonies like to be in full sun. So they like their brood to incubate at like 92 degrees. So they like it hot. So don't be afraid to put them in the sun. We have noticed that if boxes are dark black, then it can heat them up like too hot when they're in the full sun. But they have mechanisms to cool it down. So we want to pick like a lighter colored box and then put them in full sun, and then let the daily rhythms of heat and cool work with the bees' nature. Okay, another factor is privacy. So if you are in a neighborhood, which not all of us are, some of us are in a neighborhood, some of us are in an apartment and we're putting on our rooftop, and some of us are, on a large farm. But if you are in a neighborhood and someone can see your bees and is a little bothered by them, and then they're watching the bees fly out all the time, it can kind of pick at their brain and bug them. And a lot of cities have nuisance clauses, so your bees you're allowed to have bees unless a neighbor complains. So out of sight, out of mind, if you can put it away from, put them in a place like a corner between, away from prying eyes, it might be more successful and keep better relationships with your neighbors as they're not getting bothered watching your bees fly in and out, if that makes sense. So we want to be good neighbors, and so we put them where it won't be constantly in the neighbor's attention. Let's see. Commercial beekeepers need access to their hives all the time, 24/7. So access is really important to us. We need to be able to drive directly to the colony because we're moving them sometimes. We pick them up, put them on the back of a truck, and move them. So we like to have a place that you can drive up to, and that if there's a gate or something, we like to have the code, and we like to be able to access it when we're moving bees at 11 at night, when we've just made splits without having to bother a landowner. If it's your yard and you're only keeping a couple hives of bees, then moving them isn't as much of an issue. So you can put them in a more secluded place. But remember that you're going to be carrying frames of honey, boxes of honey from your bee location to where you're going to extract and process the honey. So we like to have access, but you can do that with a four-wheeler or a wheelbarrow or a wagon or something like that too. A vehicle doesn't have to be the only way, but just something to consider. Another thing to consider is if you are living on a farm or a mini farm, then you might have livestock, and so they can bother hives. For example, goats tend to jump on top of the hives. They like to play king of the mountain with whatever's there, and sometimes they can knock knock them over. Horses, if they get stung, they can kick the hives over. Horses usually are smart. That only happens a couple times and then they leave the hive alone, but they can, break the box by kicking it. Like they have a lot of power and force in their hooves. So cattle can rub against the hive. They get kind of itchy and use the hive as a scratching post and kind of flip the lids off. And they can knock over a hive too. And chickens are usually fine among the hives. We haven't dealt with hives among like alpacas or llamas or anything like that, but so if you know how bees and llamas interact, let us know. But depending on your situation, you may want to consider fencing off your yard or area so that the livestock are excluded from where the hives are. So we could use electric fencing or a row of hay bales or any kind of fencing panels to keep the livestock out of your hives, and then it will limit that interaction. Usually animals learn not to bug bees after a few times, but if that's a concern to you, you can separate them with fencing. Okay, that's a lot about fencing. Another thing is bears. If you have bears in your area, you may consider an electric fence around your hives, or in one of our apiaries that we had a lot of bears, we kept the bee hives on the roof of the cabin property. So that's an option too, but bears like to go through, swipe all the hives. They eat the honey, they eat the bees, they eat any part of it, and you just don't want bears around your family, probably because of the danger factor there too. Okay, that's a lot about bears. Skunks is another thing. Skunks are very common in our area, even in suburban areas. Bees attract skunks because skunks eat bees. They scratch on the ground right in front of the hive, and the bees come out to investigate, and they smash them up with their little claws and eat the bees themselves. They do that at night, and so if you're seeing scratching on the ground in front of your hive and have kind of angry bees, that skunks tend to make them angry. They don't like getting eaten. Okay, so if you notice that, then a good idea to avoid skunks would be to elevate your hives, because the behavior of the skunk requires scratching on the ground in front of the hives. So if you elevate them off the ground, like put another pallet there or another set of cinder blocks, the bees should be able to find their way back to their hive, and the skunks will probably leave them alone. The last thing in this pretty long video is that bees do not like vibrations. They don't like sprinklers hitting their hives every morning. They don't like lawnmowers, tractors, road construction stuff, heavy vehicles moving by. It irritates them, and they'll become an aggressive colony even if they weren't in the place of vibrations. So you either have to learn to mow the lawn wearing a bee suit, or put the hive somewhere where it's away from the lawnmower's vibrations. So that's another factor. A lot of beekeepers ask us things like, can I put my hives right next to each other? And I would say that spacing them 10 to 15 feet apart is a good idea, because it helps manage drift, which is when bees from one colony leave that colony and move to the colony next door, so leaving one weaker and the other one stronger. If we spread them apart a little bit, then it helps manage drift. But having said that, commercial beekeepers put their 4 hives on a pallet right next to each other. So you can kind of go either way and kind of make a judgment call about your space and like how much room you have. People ask us, like, can I put a Russian queen next to an Italian, next to a Carniolan, or whatever breed of bees you have? Yes, you can put any kind of bees next to each other. They very rarely interact with each other's hives unless something happens to like harm one hive. Some of the bees could go, flee to the next hive over, or like sometimes in the fall they have robbing behavior. But other than that, they're usually foraging on different nectar sources. They just ignore each other and leave each other alone for the most part. So you can put them near each other. We put our 4x4 pallets about 10 to 15 feet apart from each other, and yeah, that's kind of practically how they, and so I'm reading through the questions that we've gotten before, like, will they bother each other? No, not really, except for in the fall with robbing, and you can do some things to prevent robbing, to help with that, like reduce the entrance, like make sure their hives are both healthy, that kind of thing. And then will they compete for the same nectar sources? Maybe they'll fight it out and decide who gets that nectar source, and then the other colony will move on to a different one. So it's okay to share. You don't want to overload one apiary with too many colonies, because there are, geographically, sometimes there's limited nectar sources within an area. So we usually put 10 to 15 pallets of bees with 4 hives on each in one apiary, and we find that that's about what, a 3-mile radius can hold in our area. And then we put more bees in another area when we have more than that, if that makes sense. So hopefully this answers some questions about where to situate your hives and how to prepare your apiary for your upcoming colony. Stay tuned for more awesome beekeeping tips, classes. You can go to our website, thehoneycompany.com, and all of this is written down in one of our beekeeping lessons, which are free. We have 10 free beekeeping lessons on our website. Go check those out, and you can learn about this and a lot more there at thehoneycompany.com. If you've ordered bees from us this year, we'll see you on Saturday. Okay, bye.